Welcome to Reflections, a program where we discuss values and virtues for the transformation of the individual and the society in general. I am Father George Ehusani. Happy New Year to you all. And I want to welcome Father Emmanuel Ojeifo once again to the studio. Father Emmanuel, you are welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. This time, we want to discuss the Pope's New Year message for peace. Every year for the past 54 years, popes from Pope Paul VI, they have been issuing a statement, an appeal to the world for peace. So January 1 is World Day of Prayer for Peace for the whole Catholic Church, and then the Pope issues a document for the world. This year, the document has a theme. It is a culture of care as a path to peace in the world. Caring for our neighbor, being our neighbor's keeper as the path to peace in the world. Father Emmanuel, you have read the document, right?
Yes, I have. Very fantastic message, a very beautiful message, that everyone in the world needs to listen to.
Isn't it interesting how the Pope begins by using Cain, the statement of Cain, am I my brother's keeper? The Pope says, look, we were created and we were made stewards of creation, to care for creation. But also we are made stewards of one another, to care for one another. So when Cain killed his brother and God asked him, where's your brother? And he said, am I my brother's keeper? That actually Cain was bringing out something
in a disingenuous way. He was bringing out something of great value for humanity.
Am I my brother's keeper? It was actually a rhetorical question. He is indeed. He's supposed to be his brother's keeper. And how the Pope summarized the 7 or 8 planks of the Catholic social teaching. Equality, fundamental dignity of every human being, fundamental equality of all human beings before God, human solidarity. We are each responsible for all. We are all responsible for each, or we are all responsible for all. That fundamental responsibility of every human being to the whole and the whole to the individual. Pope emphasized that. The Pope emphasized common good, the good of everyone, the circumstances and the structures and conditions that will make each person realize his or her aspirations in life and fulfillment in life, and every group too. Good. The question I'm going to ask you is, how do you relate the Pope's message for World Day to Peace, a culture of care as path to peace, to our country?
Thank you, Father. The Pope is saying to us that if we want peace in our world, in our country, in our communities, and in our families, there's just one thing that we need to do with this message this year. We need to care for one another.
We need to care for one another.
That's the pathway. There's no other way for him. I mean, as far as the message is concerned this year, this is the way for us to achieve peace. It is interesting that he begins the message by addressing it to heads of states and governments, to leaders of international organizations, to spiritual leaders and followers of different religions, and to all men and women of goodwill. These are the 4 categories of people to whom he addressed the message. And so the message is made for everyone. Because every human person finds himself in one of these 4 categories. The vast majority of us are in people of different religions and men and women of goodwill. So with that, the Pope is saying to us that the responsibility of promoting and building peace in the world is the responsibility of every human person. It is not the responsibility of a particular group of people. It is the responsibility of everybody. So it means that all of us in our country, in our families, in our communities, have a responsibility towards building peace in society. So I think that much is very clear, that this is our common responsibility. And I think that the whole story of Cain and Abel is a very fantastic, because this is at the very beginning of humanity as the Bible presents it to us. So we see that this action of Cain sets off a chain reaction of insensitivity an indifference to the needs of our brothers and sisters right from the beginning of humanity, what we are still witnessing today. Am I my brother's keeper? So Cain is saying to God, what's my concern with my brother? Why are you asking me about him? Why should I know where he is? And at every point, God insists that we have a responsibility to one another and that we must care for one another. So we are to be our brother's keeper.
The Pope says, he is pointing the world, the leaders of governments, the leaders of international organizations, leaders of religions, and so on.
Yeah.
He is pointing our attention to care for one another, care for the least, the poor, the vulnerable, above all, as the pathway to peace. And he says, this compass I am giving you, it is what will guide us to peace. So he says, I urge government leaders and those of international organizations, business leaders, and that is important, business leaders, scientists, communicators, and educators to take up these principles as a compass. What principles? Social teachings. Capable of pointing out a common direction and ensuring a more humane future in the process of globalization. Now, he is saying this because the Pope had observed earlier in his ascension of papacy, what he calls the globalization of insensitivity,
of indifference,
of indifference.
That people don't care for one another. They see what is happening around them and they close their eyes. They are not concerned. If it doesn't affect them personally, it doesn't bother them. Almost as if the sufferings of other people are their own business and none of my concern.
Globalization of indifference.
So he says this is the reality of the world that we are living in today. But he makes a very important point that the origin of indifference among human beings in the world has its foundation in indifference towards God. When people do not live their lives as if God does not exist, or even if he exists, it doesn't matter.
Then the neighbor doesn't exist.
Then the neighbor doesn't exist. So we can see that this is we are linked together. We are living in an interconnected world. We are linked to one another as brothers and sisters. And the only reason we can really call ourselves brothers and sisters
is because we have a common Father.
One common God and Father. Otherwise, so if you cut off that part of the chain, the whole building blocks collapse.
This will enable us to esteem the value and dignity of every person, to act together in solidarity for the common good, and to bring relief to those suffering from poverty, those suffering from disease, from slavery, from armed conflicts, and from discrimination. I ask, he says, I ask everyone to take this compass, meaning the principles of the social teachings, in hand, and to become a prophetic witness of the culture of care. All of us are to become prophetic witness of the culture of care, working to overcome the many existing social inequalities. In this country, we score very high in social inequality. And the Pope is saying, all of us must work. Government leaders, business leaders, international organizations, local CSOs.
The Pope is hitting at the very people who are in the forefront of injustice and inequality in our society. Business people who treat people like trash. So no human dignity. They have to put their workers through slavish conditions in order to maximize profit.
Where profit is the name of the game.
The ultimate. So the maximization of profit is now the rule. It's what determines how you treat human beings. So the Pope is calling our attention to what is important. And it is not, we do not say that there's lack of peace in our society only when there's violent conflict. These are situations that do not promote peace.
Yes, of course.
Because somebody has to work that way almost like a slave for peanuts. He's unable to sustain his family. So there's no peace in the family because the basic necessities of human existence are not provided. And that is where also government comes in. So promoting the good of everyone, of each individual and of everyone.
There is a word called, in our day, called inclusivity. Inclusion. Social inclusion. One of the sources of conflict in Nigeria today is the lack of a sense of inclusion.
Lack of a sense of belonging.
Yes.
Yeah. People don't think that they have a responsibility, or they are not meant to feel that they are part of the whole.
Yes.
And when you cut off people that way, you can never have a society that is peaceful. Because one person who is crying, one person who is in misery, one person who is distressed can disrupt the peace of the entire.
And this
unless
is
we want a piece of the graveyard.
Yeah, this is very critical. I mean, of course, there are people who are walking towards the piece of the graveyard. When people's voices, legitimate voices,
are suppressed and silenced,
then of course what you have is the piece of the graveyard. You cannot
so I am stepping on you, but I'm telling you to keep quiet. Yes. Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
But they say, for example, you don't keep beating somebody and prevent him from crying. Which is why somebody wrote recently about wailing. The right to wail.
Yeah.
The oppressed have the right to wail.
No matter how much you close their mouth, you will eventually release them one day, and they will
wail. They will wail. This is it, that care, the culture of care as path to peace. And like we said, the Pope appeals to every segment of society. So, beginning from our neighborhoods. This is not just about government and governors and president. Beginning from our neighborhoods. I do tell people in my chapel, I say, look, do you know the name of your Megad's child? Do you recognize that your Megad is your first neighbor? How do you talk about loving God and neighbor when you do not know the name of your Megad's child?
Your driver's child.
You don't relate with
you don't even care to know where they live.
Yes.
Because when you go to see where they live,
then
you realize that
how much you are paying
and what I need to do to make sure that these people are living a decent and a dignified human life. Yeah. So it's the same, and people do that unconsciously. They do that unconsciously. They do not know how in different ways their attitudes, their patterns and habits of life promote a culture of violence.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's not just physical violence. There's psychological violence. There's psychological violence, mental violence.
The lack of inclusion is itself violence. In that same document, he reflects on the early church, chapter 4 of Acts of Apostles, how these people lived together in communion, in community, and they did not allow anyone to go on in abject poverty, in want. Those who had a little, they shared with those who had nothing, so that no one was in their need.
In want. And we ask ourselves, even in our churches, in our communities today, can we ever say that in this community no one is ever in want? Those are powerful words. Yes. No one was ever in want. They could beat their chest.
And you can see that those are high points of the Christian church. Those are high points of the Christian church, which we began to lose when we thought we began to develop and be free as Christians. It is at that time, during the first 300-400 years of the church, that you had those radical statements of people like St. Ambrose. You remember?
Yeah.
The Pope quotes St. Ambrose. For St. Ambrose, nature has poured things for the common use of all, and thus nature has produced a common right for all. But he said, greed has made it the right of only a few. So nature has provided for all. They say that nature can sustain the needs, the basic needs of everyone, but not the greed of a evil few. One.
Yeah.
So if we continue in this kind of very brutal, insensitive, liberal capitalism, where if you are a smart guy, you can own half of Abuja, and there is no end to people's greed.
The more you acquire, the more you need. The more you see why you should acquire more. So human greed is insatiable, but our basic needs are satiable. We can afford to. We have resources to care for the needs of everyone.
Which is why self-control is one of the gifts of the Spirit that we all need. To say
at a point in time, you must apply the brakes.
I have enough.
Yeah, I have enough. Yeah.
See what is happening in the international community. So they will tell you that this is the richest person in our state. Tomorrow the person is competing to be the richest person in the country. and the richest person in Africa,
and then he wants to be among the club of the rich in the world.
Now, and I'm saying, to what purpose? For what purpose? To what end? So you are the richest person.
How do you feel when you go back to your the community that groomed you, that brought you up?
To what end? And you see, when people begin to compete for this, what it means is that they accumulate capital. Because you cannot be the richest person in your village, in your town, in your country, if you are not accumulating. And accumulating means that there will be times that you are supposed to help people and you don't help, so that the capital can accumulate.
So it's the whole point of indifference towards God. When people do not recognize that there's a God who has created them and that he has obliged us to be stewards of one another, that whatever goods and resources we have are only blessings from God,
and that we are only agents.
We are only agents. We are only stewards, and that we should use these resources to promote the good of one another.
It's not even, I mean, to be indifferent to God, the consequences are enormous. It's not just the issue of economic equality and so on, but respect for life. From conception to natural death.
Yeah.
If we recognize that we have a common Father,
and that every human life has value.
Every human life has value before the Creator. Then, is it easy for you to think of taking life? Is it easy for you to torture? I mean, we have just talked about police brutality in this country and NSAS. A lot of those people, I don't think you can call many of them godly. If those who are engaged in SARS, who arrested young people, took them to ATM machines to rob them of money, or tortured them, or quote unquote waste them, do they know God? I think that they were completely indifferent to God. Then so-called leaders who appropriate resources meant for the community for themselves and live large and ignore. Do they know God?
No.
So this point you have made about indifference to God leads to indifference to neighbor. It's very, very important for us to begin to use it to critically, back to social analysis, critically question how religious are our people.
Well, isn't that why the Pope says at a point in his message that he is charging religious leaders all over the world?
Yes.
Because they have he uses the word, they have an indispensable role to play in promoting a culture of peace and of care among their followers. So it's a question, you have raised a very vital question of what is the quality of our religiosity. Are we people who have encountered, and that's what I was saying in the homily today, that there are many of us Christians who are simply churchgoers. We are chronic churchgoers, as you have always said. We go to church, but then when we leave the church, religion and God stays in the temple. Life takes a different turn outside. So the very people who are saying on the mountain, in the valley, in the land and in the sea, I will praise the Lord in the church, they leave the church immediately, and then
the behavior outside.
The first thing they do is to even quarrel at the car park. Oh, because you have parked your car in a way that has blocked me and this and that. After that, what happens? They are the ones who will be traffic lights. So right after church, you can see that people don't even have regard for their own life and the life of other people, and that's why they're going to be traffic lights. So they have no concern, no regard for the life of other people. So the Pope is charging religious leaders who have an indispensable role to play in promoting the culture of care. And it's not just empty words, empty rhetoric. By example, we must see it happening within the religious community, within the Christian community, within the Islamic community. We must become that oasis that gives light to society, to tell this is how to care for human beings, this is how to care for one another. If you want to know how it is being done, come to our community and see how we are doing it.
So we religious people, we really need to give witness by our own personal
prophetic
lives.
Witness, as the Pope says.
But in a world of limited resources, we cannot live large with literally unlimited wealth, and then we are telling our people to care for one another. It's not possible.
Yeah. Or building bogus churches, multi-million naira edifices here and there in a community where, when you look around, the people who are staying in that place where you have built a church of 2 billion naira, they don't even have a toilet.
Yes.
the toilet where they. So what God are you worshiping in that church? When as soon as you get out of the church, the life of the people who
are
are
living in
there
a slum.
is totally.
So there's quite some challenge for us.
Yeah.
Quite from challenge for us in the Catholic Church, challenge for us in the Protestant Church, in Pentecostal churches. We need to look at the quality of our life and constantly ask ourselves, how am I caring? How are we as a community of Christians, as a community of Muslims, how are we caring for our neighbor? So, I mean, everybody should know that among the elements of godliness is care for the neighbor. You are supposed to be your neighbor's keeper.
If you don't love your neighbor that you can see, how can you show that you love the God that you have not seen? And Jesus tells us ultimately in the parable of the Last Judgment, I'm not going to ask you how many times you went to church. I'm probably not going to ask you whether do you know God. The question is, when I was hungry, did you give me food? Did you care for your
the parable of the Good Samaritan?
Yeah. So the word for judgment on the last day will be love.
Yes.
Did you love one another? Yes. If your answer is no, then
isn't it St. John of the Cross who says in the very
end of our lives we will be judged on love. Yeah.
Love will be the last word of history.
Love will prevail. Even St. Paul says there are three things that last:
faith, hope, and love.
But the greatest is love. Love will have the final word. Yeah. So
you see this thing called love. To what extent do people of our generation really know what is love? Because you see,
love has been abused.
Love has been abused, and there's so much confusion between pleasure and love. Somebody says he's in love today, 1 year after, what he says about the person he says he's in love with, you can't believe it. Yeah. So it's like we have so confused the concept of love, and I don't know how parents from childhood, people are going to have to be taught what is love. You know, I discussed here with Father Isiche some time ago, and he says that the definition that has appealed to him very powerfully, that when the welfare and the happiness of another is important for my own, necessary for my own happiness, then the state of love exists. So, and we are going to be judged on love. To what extent
is the happiness of
the people in your environment necessary for your own happiness? If your own happiness is obtained at the
expense of the happiness of the other people, then love does not exist there. So if people are suffering and you are happy,
yes, you are happy because you have escaped, as they say in Nigeria,
I have escaped poverty. Or I have made it. Yes. You have made it at the expense of others. There's no love.
You know, that's why I keep telling my people, I say, look, each time I hear he has done well for himself, I say it's an anomaly.
It's a failure. He has done well for himself. It's the mark of failure.
It's a mark of failure. That why would you say somebody has done well for himself? You want us to applaud you have done it well for yourself in spite of your people. And in every part of this country, just look at all the big names, rich people, so-called successful people, and look at their villages. Look at the environment. I mean, surrounded by walls and fences. Those walls, those high walls and barbed wires, you needed them because you did not take care of
the needs of other people. If you took care of their
needs,
wouldn't. They will protect. They will become your barbed wires, and they will protect you. Yeah, and it's to say that even the illiterate knows who loves. Even people who have not gone to school.
Mentally deranged people, they know?
They know what love is when they see it. So that's a common value that God has given to all of us. That it is possible for every one of us to love. This is the unifying value for humanity.
How do we make the young people in our society to know, who today are aspiring to live in places where they have fences and barbed wires and electrified whatever? How do we make them to know that the society is developing in the wrong way?
Well, I think that somehow we have to find a way to because there are many young people who recognize that this is not the way to live. In fact, when you live in seclusion, you already tell people who their enemies are, so that when there is any problem, they know where to go. They know exactly where to go. If we were living in communities, because we had, low-cost housing, our communities were designed to accommodate both rich and poor.
Yes.
But now, I mean,
No.
it's so you look at
Segregated communities.
Deriki, and then you move a few meters away, and it is Durumi, and they are 2 worlds apart.
Yes.
You look at Maitama, and you go
Gishiri,
to Pape,
you go
Gishiri
to
or
Gishiri.
Pape, they are 2 worlds apart, and they are separated by just a few meters. Then you go to Asokoro,
And then you
look at Paduma. And
every part of our cities, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, and all these cities are divided cities between
the rich and the poor. So
It's an
how because so when there's trouble, the poor people know where to go. Like when the NSAS protests happened, where were the protests taking place? Were they taking place inside Paduma?
No.
They came to the very city, to those who are there, who need to hear what they are saying. So we need to, if you don't visit a poor neighborhood will visit you. If you don't visit a poor neighborhood will visit you. So we need to let people know that it is in our own collective best interest to take care of everyone.
On that note, we will bring this program to an end. It is in our own collective interest to take care of everyone. That is the path to peace as we embrace a new year 2021. God bless you. And thank you very much for coming.